Hi guys, thank you for joining me today for another story. This one is called The Hitchhiker and it takes place in Montana in the Glacier National Park. The park is so big that it reaches from Montana all the way into Canada. Sorry for the pronunciation, but I'm sure if you live around the area you know what I'm talking about. So it was during July 1983 when a dead man's body was found in the glaciers, and this led law enforcement on a mission to solve this case what lasted 3 decades. Okay, so in July 1983, there was a woman named Anne living in New York, and she gets a phone call from a kind of park ranger, and he was calling from the National Glacier, and he asked her if she had a certain type of car in 1968. So Anne says to the ranger, yeah, and me and my brother, we do own that van. We're both registered, our names in that van. The thing is, my brother's not missing. He's not around. He's gone missing, and I don't have the van. He had the van. So then the ranger then says to Anne, unfortunately, some hikers they found a man's body in the glaciers. So the guy who had been found, Anne's brother, was called Fred, and he had told the family, I'm gonna pack up and I'm gonna go for a job in the northwest of the country, and after that I'm gonna go exploring for a little while. So he did that. He packed up his things and he went on his way. So Fred's dad was concerned because he knew his son better than anyone, and he knew that Fred always documented everything, wherever he went, his journeys, he would write everything down. And he was worried because the van was nowhere near where Fred's body was found, and all the belongings, there was no belongings, no identification on Fred as well. So that's what concerned the family and Fred's dad the most. So authorities were starting to listen to what Fred's dad was saying and taking note, and they believed that he could have been murdered and that he was actually travelling with somebody else. So Jerry Bell is the deputy, the sheriff, who actually told Annie and her family that they'd found the body, her brother, and he reckons that Fred had fell from 186 feet from a cliff or something like that. So Jerry, the one who stood over Fred's body, who examined the body, and he was saying that the wounds didn't look like fall wounds because he'd fell right into a sharp cliff. The wounds were just not matching up with someone who had fell from a cliff, and the night before there'd been like a rainstorm and it had washed away all the evidence. So obviously authorities are now thinking that things are not adding up. So they send kind of like a news flash out asking for anyone with any information to come forward, and a truck driver comes forward, and he says one night he was traveling down a road 70 miles away from where the incident happened, and there was a man in a car, and he was basically stuck in mud, and he asks the trucker for help. So the trucker says, yeah, sure, I'll help you, and then the man says, sorry, I can't pay you, but I can offer you my camera instead. So the trucker says that's fine, takes the camera and helps the guy. So the police are now hoping that the camera has got some information on, and they're hoping that it does belong to Fred. Another person came forward and said that they'd found a pair of bloody trousers with some identification 170 miles away south of the glaciers. The ID, what they found with the bloody pair of trousers, was a guy named Scott Steele. The police get this kind of stuff coming in all the time. At first it didn't really register with them because it was like 170 miles away, and the police are always getting bloody this, IDs found, clothing here and there. So they didn't really take note for now, but later on they kind of do. Derek Bell, actually, the deputy, he was kind of thinking maybe it could have something to do with this man's disappearance and murder. Derek and the rest of the law enforcement team who was on the case, they got his body looked at more thoroughly, and it came back, the report came back that it's more likely he had died from stab wounds, not from a fall. The state medical examiner changed the death certificate and said that it was because of how much blood had come out of the torso at death. That's how they knew that basically he hadn't died from his fall. So there was a campsite in Montana called Shadyville, something like that. The owner of the campsite has come forward and said that, I think it was July the 12th, I think it was 2 days before his body was found, Fred's body was found. He's saying that Fred and another guy, basically they've checked into his campsite and everything was fine, but then the next night they were arguing and causing a lot of commotion outside near the campsite, and it was kind of, everyone was on edge and worried. Owner was that kind of shook up that he had to get in a shotgun to approach them. So as he's approached them, not Fred, the other guy who Fred was with, he pulled out a knife at the campsite owner, basically threatening him. Everything had calmed down, knife got put away, but the owner said, "I'm sorry, you can't stay here." But he said to Fred, "You can stay, but your guest can." So, you know, Fred was reluctant to leave his friend. So apparently they packed up their things and they left in the Volkswagen. Okay, so they left the campsite, and then a few hours later, local police, sheriff department, they get a call from Fred actually making a complaint against the campsite owner. So the police get a complaints phone call from Fred about the guy who owns the campsite. And then a few hours later, apparently Fred called again to make another complaint, but this one apparently wasn't logged or something around them lines, or it wasn't clear who was making the call, but they got two calls about the campsite owner. Police believe that the ID that was found, that one, the police believe that he killed Fred and stole his truck. What happened next was Scott got through the Canadian border with him and his black Labrador dog. So they got through, and just him and the dog. So where's Fred? So basically what happened was, the people who let him through, the border control, they didn't realise that Scott was wanted for a robbery in Alberta. So Scott was actually a wanted fugitive from Canada. Two people in Alberta had come forward and said that he tried to rob them while he was out walking with his dog. Police tracked Scott down to California, and it was downtown LA. When they found his vehicle, someone had tried to break into it, but they found so much fresh evidence, which was rare, and they found Scott's sister's number. So they called her. She was very cooperative. Apparently she was trained to be a police officer. She invited the police over to her house. So she actually showed the police some items that Scott had left before he told her he was going hitchhiking north of the country, Montana side. The police were searching through the items, and they actually found some items belonging to Fred. Okay, so it's nearly 8 months later that this case picks up again, because they couldn't find him. No, they had nothing on him. And then 8 months later, he was walking in Utah with his dog, hitchhiking down the road, and he gets picked up by police, and then he gets nicked because he's got an active warrant out. So they nick him, and I don't know if they say that in the US, but they nicked him and they charged him with the murder of Fred. So, you know, it did go to trial, and the defense was trying to say that Fred had actually fell down the cliff himself, and also the fact that there was no evidence that he had murdered Fred, and also where was the knife. But anyway, the judge on that case did sentence him to life in prison. So the judge, he threw the death penalty out, and he just said, you know, life in prison, because we don't want no one else getting hurt. Yeah, we don't want no one else getting hurt, and you will likely kill again out of thinking you can get away with this. So yeah, he's never getting out, thank God. The bloody pants that were found by that person who came forward, they did get tested, and they both had Fred and Scott's DNA on. So they'd both been around the pants, and the pants had blood on, and it was there. So unfortunately, Just when we think that this man's never getting out, his attorneys actually got him out after just 16 years in prison, because every state in America is different. And Montana, after 16 years, after a violent offence, if you've shown good behaviour, you can get out with less prison time. So August 2003, Scott is a free man, and all of a sudden he decides that he's going to stop signing in with his parole board, and he drops off the radar for 6 years. So as soon as US Marshals become aware of this fact, he gets put on America's most wanted list, and it goes out internationally around the world. And also it goes out to the border control people so they can be aware, because they believe that he's going to try and cross the border again. At the time he went missing, he was dating a woman named Catherine Earl, and she also went missing around that time that he went missing. So a warrant has gone out for her arrest also. He's wanted for larceny. Sometime around 2009, Mexican officials believed that they had found him and he was under a different name, reported him, and eventually he was arrested and sent back to the US. And he went to jail, but you know, not long after that he got paroled again. So November 2017, he was actually arrested again because he had threatened a female bartender with a knife. So this was in Idaho, Twin Falls. This man gets about, doesn't he? So he was there, he was dating, I think, the bartender's mother or something like that, and they asked him to leave and he left, and then he came back, and then they asked him to leave again, and he stabbed a knife into the bar top and demanded to be served. Okay, so he comes back a third time and demands to be served. And obviously, you know, they don't, and he walks out the bar and he's very angry, and he starts mumbling under his breath about his previous murders that he's committed. So the bartender gets really scared at this point, so she quits her night shifts because she's worried that he might come back. So she doesn't do her night shifts, she sticks to her day shifts. In May 2018, he's arrested and charged with aggravated assault on the bartender. He starts saying, oh, you know, it's my morbid sense of humour, that's why I said what I said. And he's trying to say that when he got arrested at age 23 for murder, he became institutionalised. So he was sentenced to 20 years for that knife offence with the bartender, and he was required to serve 10 of those years. So if we go way back to the beginning, where poor Fred was murdered. So Fred was murdered, and actually 30 years to that day, in that park, there was another murder, like I said, on the exact same day, but 30 days later. So yeah, I may talk about that in another video, but that is the end of the video. And thank you for watching, and if you like my channel, please subscribe, and I will see you at the next one.